Well, hello and welcome back. Tonight we're looking at two examples of Springfield Armory Model 1911s. Now, Colt granted the Ordnance Department the right to manufacture the Model 1911 only after orders for 50,000 pistols were placed. Now, plans were made for a pistol plant at Springfield Armory in 1911, almost immediately after that, and there was a study was made for the cost. And there was a plan A for an entire separate pistol plant and a plan B for a plant that would use rifle plant machinery in making these. Now, plan B meant that the pistol manufacturing would need to be halted if full capacity, 500 rifles a day, was to be produced. Now, the military decided on Plan B, and they couldn't have the foresight for World War I at that point in time, but they went with Plan B, and they only thought that they would need 120,000 pistols for the military at that point in time. Now, the contract they had with Colt only allowed the armory to produce 1/3 of their pistols, of the military's production requirements. Now, when they finally went to take and start to manufacture these pistols, Colts did not have drawings. They used models as gauges, and they had highly skilled craftsmen. They did have drawings, but they were only overall dimensions, and that was it. Now, Springfield used 20 samples of the Colt production to make drawings with tolerances. And the completion of the final drawings were delayed until the first trial lot of pistols could be completed. And the first drawings that were produced in September of 1914. But machines, tools, and fixtures were installed and pretty much in place by late 1913. So production of the pistols actually began in early 1914. And the first 30 were serial numbers 72,571 through 72,600. Now, these were made by hand to test the accuracy of the tools and gauges that they had there and check the interchangeability with Colt's product. And interchangeability was a must. All these pistols have to work and be able to interchange, and we'll discover that more as we go through the history of these pistols. Now, the first pistol forwarded to the Ordnance Department for approval of finish was the 72,571 pistol, and some slight changes were discovered that they had to make in the tooling to avoid having to do any hand fitting. Now, component parts in these are marked with an S so that they won't be confused with Colt products or parts. Excuse me. Now, ultimately, the government, by producing their own pistols, was able to save $3.88 per pistols, and these actually ended up being slightly different than the Colt products. And the first major difference is the front sight on these is an integral part of the pistol in the Springfield Armory models, and in the Colt models it's a separate piece. Now, the radius of the rear sight of these differs. They use a smaller radius, Colts used a larger radius, and oddly enough, Springfield Armory changes that a little bit later on, and they go to the larger radius. And then they use the Type 1 hammers to begin with, and they use those up until about serial number 77,000. Then they switched to the Type 2, and then ultimately they ended up with the Type 3 after about 82,000. Now, this firing pin stop in these is slightly different. The upper edge is rounded on these, whereas it's not in the Colt. And then the stocks on these are slightly different, having a coarser, rougher cut on the checkering and then a larger diamond. And then the magazines in these are all flanged on the bottom, and they did that because they were working with trying to keep from importing the tube steel in order to make those magazines. They used flat metal and bent it so they could get the proper shape that they needed. Now, the magazines are pretty interesting. One of the other things with these is they took, and I've got a quote here that I wanted to read you. It says, after the magazines were formed and welded, the top rear corners were copper plated for 3 minutes. And then the upper portion of the body was the cyanide hardened for 4 minutes at a temperature of 1600 degrees Fahrenheit. And quenched in sperm oil. Then the lips were tempered in lard at a temperature of 430 degrees Fahrenheit to give spring tension. This area, I'm going to stop for a second, this area was very weak in these early magazines and had a lot of failure rates in there. So the magazines were important to get those right. So anyway, the bottom portion was then sandblasted and dipped into a nitrate bluing solution, potassium nitrate and manganese peroxide, for 5 minutes, darkened in hot whale oil, cleaned with gasoline, and oiled. Lanyard loop was eliminated on these in March of 1916, but they had so many in production that there are very few of these without lanyard loops. Now, another interesting note, the Armory was under the impression that their magazines were superior to that of Colt's. So anyway, they continued to manufacture until early 1917, and then as the threat of America's involvement in World War I increased, production of the pistols was curtailed in order to increase rifle production. Now, it was noted that there was a production bottleneck at the drilling part of the operation. That's where they were slowing down. They couldn't get these frames drilled fast enough for both the rifles and the pistols. And a study was done, and it was just determined that they were ultimately going to have to cease production in favor of rifle production, because Colts was already fully tooled and producing pistols. And then that's where we see some of these other pistols come into production, like the Remington UMC, which we'll do in another video. So the suspension of pistol production took place on April 15th of 1917. And that was done, of course, in favor of being able to produce more of the Springfield Armory Model 1903 rifles. And they were able to produce 260,000 approximately of those rifles during World War I. So on May 16th of 1917, Springfield Armory forwarded all the parts they had to Colt's, and it was approximately 10,000 receivers, 10,000 barrels, and 8,000 slides. And Springfield Armory also reclaimed many unfinished parts from various other manufacturers via the Ordnance Salvage Board. And these all ended up back at, after World War I, back at Springfield Armory. And some of these parts went later on to Ithaca for use in their 1911 A1s for World War II production. There was approximately 6,200 of those receivers and other various pieces that went to Ithaca. So there's a basic rundown of the Springfield history of their production of Model 1911. And that's it for them. They didn't produce any more after that. So there you go, another interesting look at them. And the next video I'm going to do, we're going to just take a close look at the pistol itself. So there's a little bit of history of the 1911 production in Springfield Armory. Alright, hey, thanks for tuning in and watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and have a great evening.